Um, okay, so hopefully everyone can see the screen. Everything's good, because you've got to do that when you start a remote session. You've got to go, can you hear me? Can you see the screen? Everyone's good. Make sure we got that covered. So the way I wanted to target this session is fairly simple. Half an hour. I'm not going to get into a huge amount of depth for I suppose some of those deep technical topics, because it is a wide-ranging audience and people are going to be at different stages. I figured as far as a run through of half an hour, it'd be good probably just to run through a career a journey and trying to think about a few things in particular, such as, you know, how are you doing in your stage of your career? What are you doing in terms of supporting and mentoring those who might be potential leaders around you? Subordinates, if you've got them, where are they at? And then that last one, you know, is leadership even something you want to be doing? Because if you're not enjoying it, it kind of sucks, speaking from experience. So you've got to be able to, you know, think through these things. And I figured this is a good place to start. And then through each stage of a career, what are the things I need to be thinking about? What are the things I need to be concerned with? So as a starting point, probably good to cover off what I see leadership as. You'll see different people talk about it different ways, but just running through a few things here. So leadership is, or at least what it isn't, it's not management sunshines. Management and leadership are orthogonal concerns. They're not the same thing, and it's really easy to get confused with the two of them. Leadership is not being an entrepreneur. That just means you're good at sales and spotting ideas. And plenty of entrepreneurs suck at being leaders. It's not being the smartest person in the room. It's not being the first to do something. It's not even being in some organizational position that has the word leader in your title. In fact, there's plenty of people who've got leader in their title who are not leaders and are terrible leaders, including the, well, actually, I should almost said Trump. Wait, I did. And now I've just offended people, but that's okay. What it is, leadership is really this idea of inspiring others to achieve a common goal. How do I work with a group of people and get them to achieve something together? This applies not just in the corporate world, but in volunteer organizations, in social situations, wherever it happens to be. There's this idea that I can talk to people and we can get a shared vision and achieve something together. That's the essence of leadership. How you do that, there is no fixed way of doing it, but there are things you can do and principles that sit behind how you behave and how you act that lead you to being a leader. So as a way of thinking about this a little separately, again, this idea of management and versus leadership in particular, there's a few common questions you might ask yourself, or comparison questions, I should say. You know, how do I show that I'm a good manager? How do I convince, you know, someone that I am? And generally the answer to that is fairly simple. It's, you know, can I use my staff or get my staff to follow a process or maintain a system, whether that's a corporate system, a behavioral system, a process system, whatever it happens to be, or how do I utilize the resources I've been given? Resources not equaling people necessarily, but just whatever it is, and I'm managing that capacity to follow or maintain a process. Very different to leadership, which is how do I show I'm a good leader? Again, as you can probably guess, by the influence I have on those around me. How do I help them grow? How do I help them improve? Are we working together or are they infighting? You know, generally those kind of things to be considered. Or I might go, well, how do I become a manager even? And the simple answer is you either get that through promotion or being someone who can lie in interviews. Because it's really an assigned role. It's that someone says, you are now the manager, congratulations. The question of how do I become a leader? Well, that one is very different. That's very much a case of you earn it. This is something that happens gradually. It's over time. It's by building trust with those who are around you and becoming someone that people choose to actually follow and to get behind. There are plenty of people in management positions who do not have a team behind them because they get stabbed in the back by their teammates. We see it in sport fairly regularly as well. Coaches that lose the player room or the locker room. And they lose that idea that they're the leader now and running things, and then they just become the figurehead or something else. Insert words here. And again, just this idea that a leadership role does not automatically make you a leader. Neither does not having a leadership role mean you can't lead. So keep this in mind. Now, with this, there's a few things to consider. There's whole reams of books on leadership that you can read. A lot of them will tend to talk management, so pick and choose your books well, but there's a bunch that are actually quite good. Through these, there's various traits that tend to come out as a common pattern. So again, strangely enough, this idea of influence is key in all of them. But then sitting behind that is, how do we grow as a leader to improve our influence? And one of those things is consistent and incremental growth in our capacity, in the way we communicate, in the way we treat other people, in our knowledge, in our understanding of problems outside the ones we normally deal with. It's our ability to express a vision, or even to have and build a vision, and to make sure that we get our teams aligned to that same vision, so that we're communicating that out to them. It's our service to others, and this seems strange, right? This idea of, if I'm a leader, why am I serving? But service is what I'm referring to, is that idea of servant leadership. The way you support others is by helping and making them successful. And it becomes a two-way street. By you showing that you support them, they turn around and reciprocate that and support you, and we work well together, and we succeed together. That's the idea of leadership. Within that, there's a sense also of trust, being able to establish trust. And the idea similarly that if you break trust, you lose the influence you have with others, and therefore you start eroding your ability to lead as well. And tied to that, the idea of respect, and tied to that, the idea of visibility. It's very hard to have a vision and gain trust and respect from others if you're an invisible leader. The classic ivory tower management team who no one ever sees. They're not great leaders because you don't know who they are, what they do, nothing like that. You want to be visible and transparent to your team. As you scale, there's different challenges to that, but these are the traits that sit behind good leaders. And if you think through your career, who are the people I've wanted to follow? Who are the people I've respected? Who are the people I've learned to trust, and who I've been influenced by? You will see these traits coming through in them. So for us in our career, the one key that needs to be thought through all the time, and this is a quote from John Maxwell, who writes a whole bunch of these leadership books, is this idea that wherever I am at today, if I want to lead tomorrow, I need to keep improving. I need to keep learning right now so that I'm ready when opportunity comes. Remembering that leadership is not assigned, leadership is earned. You need to keep on top of that right from the beginning, no matter what stage of the career you're at. So let's run through those stages, shall we? Let's start with the very beginning. We've gone off and we've gained ourselves an education, and we're in our early career. What's our goal at this point? If this idea of to lead tomorrow means, obviously, at this point, learn and observe. Pay attention to what's going on around you. Look at the leaders who are with you. What are they saying? What are they doing? What are they doing that works well? What are they doing that sucks? Preferably follow the stuff they're doing well and not the other stuff. In the early career, you also want to start looking at your own character and avoiding some of the things, such as, the thing you often see with new people, where they don't prove that they're good, they prove that they're less bad than the rest. By trying to pull others down and become quite political. This is not a great way to become a good leader. This is a great way to become promoted, but you're never going to lead. You might end up being in a position where you get rewarded with a position because, hey, there's no one else around and you're the best worst choice, but it's not good for you long term, and you'll find that you end up quickly out of your depth and then either get moved sideways or get kicked out, one or the other. Much better than to think about that idea of building in connection and influence. So that means also talk to people outside your team. It's not just those you're working with on a day-to-day basis, but understand now what's happening around you. What is the context we're working in? Pay attention to the industry around you, the domain space that you're in, gain business knowledge, understand what the different roles in the organization are doing, and then through that, from a technical perspective, obviously grow your tech skills and improve there. So this is, early stuff when we're the graduates. At the same time, was there a question, or did I just echo?
There was. Sorry, before you move on, Richard, the question from Andrew, and he asked a question. As a leader, how does one deal with toxic people? It's not too uncommon to work with 10x developers who are not so great human beings.
Yeah, I agree. I don't work with the 10x developers who aren't great human beings. Not by choice anyway. I want people who will act and work well in a team environment. You need to be a team player. Now, sometimes being fair, calling someone a 10x developer is kind of silly a little bit anyway, because it's inferring that no one else is any good. But it's probably more, I'd refer to them as the hero developer, the one who wants to be seen as better than anyone else. And again, if you come back to this idea, that second point there, pulling others down as a way of making yourself look better, you'll see that they tend to do that a bit. They belittle other people's code, they promote their own ideas, they don't listen to feedback. Can you work with those people long term? It depends on your relationship with them. If you can get them to change their behavior, well done.
I guess it's possibly unavoidable. So say you have an integration project, you may have to work with these folks.
Yeah, you may have to. In which case, the best you can do is probably this next slide here, which is don't try and change them too much, but show leadership yourself in terms of how you behave and how you act. And then when there's a choice made, and I'll cover this in the next slide anyway a little bit, so I might just come back to it, but what you'll find is that the people with the good soft skills and the good behavior who work well with others are the ones who get given the opportunities. And those who are technically strong, but peoply weak, people is a thing, by the way, it is now, those people tend to get left in their spot. And they get pigeonholed and they stay in a position, and that's it. And if that's where they're happy, that's great. But if you want to grow and you want to improve, focus on improving yourself and making sure that you're visible. And then you're going to end up in a situation where hopefully down the track, you're in that position of authority and you can control or manage that person a little better. So it's a bit of a long play. But in terms of leading in the small, this again comes down to starting to lead with those around you. Build trust and respect, but do it through good work, consistent personal growth. Deliver well, serve the rest of the team around you, make sure you support them. And not just those you work for, but those you work with. There's again, plenty of people who will present well up to their boss. I've had people do that to me as well, that they act and behave a certain way because they think I'm watching. And then when I'm not watching, they're bastards. And the fun thing is you actually hear that anyway. When you talk to your team, you find out that information and you can see that there's a double standard of behavior occurring, which then leads to interesting HR things at times. Different topic. But in that early stage of your career, don't hide problems. It's okay. People expect you to make mistakes. So when you do, ask for help, but also talk through solutions that you might approach or ideas you've tried. And if you're leading graduate devs and they're in your team, you've got to give them the space to make these mistakes as well. Help them to understand that what you're after is not someone who works for you, but someone who works with the team. They gain the respect of you, they understand other colleagues around them, and you start building that relationship with them, and that gives them the opportunity to thrive and the opportunity to grow. And that helps you identify who in your team out of those new grads is a potential leader themselves and someone you want to invest time in versus someone you will yourself pigeonhole and put into that team member only box.
I've got another question from Pratik. Yep. And Pratik asks, as a leader, if your team depends on another team and there are issues from that team or different priority, how should the leader deal with the other team's leader? Specifically, if the team is not in your organizational hierarchy?
So that word on the last bullet point that I was almost going to read then, influence, is really what it comes down to. You can't control what the other team's doing. That's the reality. And the reality of life as you get further and further up in the management chain and the leadership chain is that you realize that you actually can't control anyone or anything. And the sooner you realize that you don't control everything, the sooner you go, well, what's my alternate strategy? My alternate strategy is influence. And I can influence through, again, trust, respect, good relationships, showing that I've got a good track record of delivery, that I work well with others, that I will collaborate, and that I'm quite happy to do some give and take. And when they have needs of me, I've supported them. And using that history, that relationship to then effectively achieve the goals that I want my team to achieve and support them in doing that. There's really no substitute for influence and for communication. Hopefully that answers the question. We can come back to that one as well. So a little bit just in terms of my personal history, so where some of this came from. So I did, before I even got a paid job as a developer, I worked as an intern for a company called Textile Industries Australia. They made bed linen. This is Sheridan Textiles, if you ever bought beds off them, and a few other things. I was writing an awesome language, RPG2 on a Wang VS mainframe. Anyone? Just me? It's effectively a half step up above this assembly. It was great. But through that, I showed that I could basically do the job. I was doing basic stuff. I was running around, answering phones, ops work, doing a few other things, as you can see there. But one of the things I noticed in the team I was working with is there was one dev in particular who was highly respected technically and barely tolerated. This, in some respects, was that 10x developer that we were referring to before. Really great at hands on the keyboard and sucked as a human being. And it was interesting seeing that and how the rest of the organization interacted with them. They'd use them if they had to, but they were never the first choice. They'd talk to them if they had to, but they were never the first choice. They'd always go to someone else if they could. And at the same time, there was another dev who was there who was effectively a task doer. They did what they were asked to do. That's great. And they got in and they wrote code, and they were completely ignored because they didn't communicate, they didn't build relationships, they didn't do anything to try and grow their presence or their visibility. And they were effectively just that kind of person who's there. And these two people, both of them, stayed in exactly the same role the entire time I worked at this place. Never moved, never did anything different. It was always the same. And for some people, if they're happy doing that, that's great. No problem at all. But if you're looking to move into a leadership role, then you really need to be not them. Now, for me, I didn't think about any of this stuff. I was just, when I first started, was just do things, make sure I do a good job, make sure I do well, make sure I communicate, and try and do the best I can for whoever walks in the door. That unintentionally, I'd like to say it was planned, but it was completely unintentional, earned me trust with the execs, and I got noticed, which was great, which meant that when I actually did graduate, I got hired back into that same company I interned with and was actually put into a special projects team, which is kind of interesting. Because if there's this special projects team, then why wasn't the super awesome dev in that team? Or why wasn't someone else who's been around for ages, part of that group? And I'd like to think it was just because of my wonderful good looks and bad sense of humor, but that's not really what happened. It was more a case of the execs saw something in me and gave me an opportunity to grow. And I can't say how much I appreciate that opportunity, but it wouldn't have happened without having done that first stint of do the best you can with what you've got, and go from there. And it doesn't mean I didn't make mistakes. I proved to them that my UI and UX skills were terrible. Apparently purple and green as a color scheme, which I thought was great and cool, is not easy to look at. Who knew? But the nice thing with this opportunity was that it then meant I got exposure to a CIO and how they were working and what they were looking at and thinking about. And it gave me a whole lot of other opportunities to grow my influence with others as well. And then from there, I ended up leaving, and because I like doing languages like 4GL and RPG2, I went and did a thing called English Application Language at Lend-Lease. Again, all the glamorous languages, baby. But again, working in a good system. And then at this point, one of the more interesting things here was I had a leader who had no technical ability. And when I turned up, I was like, well, how can you be here? You've got no tech skills at all. And yet, looking back at it, they're one of the best people I've ever worked for because they had great influence, because they built trust, because they had, the communications and the visibility. They could describe a vision and bring people together on the same path. Now, me back then, early 20s, I knew everything, of course, so I paid no attention at all to this stuff. But playing it back over time, I learned lessons unintentionally from this person. And that's something, again, in that early stage of the career, learn, observe, pay attention, because it will help you later on. So for any of you who have got new and growing people in your team, this is what you want to be doing with them, getting them to start paying attention to this stuff, getting them to think through these types of challenges. All right, before we jump on to next stage, any other questions, Alex?
No, there's no questions currently in the chat.
Sweet. All right, I shall rock and roll, keep going. Okay, so you've now been recognized, let's say in your career, you've done enough stuff, you've been recognized, and you've been given your first formal recognized leadership opportunity. Your challenge now is that you have to shift focus. And this is something that a lot of people struggle with, that it's not now the tasks you do that add value, it's the success of your team. And yet you're still tasked with doing hands-on work. So how do you balance that hands-on work with the people side of things? If you value yourself or you've seen your contribution as being, I write great code, then this is really hard. And I don't know if I can stress this one enough. This is where most people stepping into leadership fall over. And for us as more experienced and seasoned leaders, this is the one thing to pay attention to more than anything else. How do I balance my time? How do I balance my focus? How do I balance my effort? How do I balance giving people space to make mistakes versus telling them what to do because I know better, because I've done it myself, and falling into the trap of being a dictator or a micromanager? And the other thing to pay attention to is, are they actually enjoying the role? Because what you'll see with those who step into it, I like the idea of moving up, and I like the idea of maybe a bigger pay packet, but at the same time, what I really enjoy is writing the code. And so they'll do it for a little bit, and then that people side of things, they just kind of gradually step away from it, and they let things slip and they let things slide because they tend to get more focused on the screen in front of them than the people around them. And so for the more experienced leaders, pay attention to how this is happening in your teams. It is one of those traps that many people will fall into. And if you've done this before, you probably went through this phase yourself. It's a challenge. So what do we need to, question, yes, shoot.
Curtis asks, how do I balance my time? And notes that this sounds like a topic we had from last week.
How do you balance your time? I don't know. Where do you have to spend your time? I know I wish I had a better answer for you, but it's very situational. Where are the demands on your time? How big is your team? How mature are the people you're working with? I wish I had a good, clear answer, but this is that hard part of leadership, which is no one can tell you what you're doing. You have to figure it out. We can support you in it. We can be someone who's a bit more mature, can bounce things around with you, and you can talk through problems. But part of leadership is being able to manage these things and manage your time and describe what you need to do and think about the big picture while dealing with the small. I think there's a few other questions popping up. Is there?
I should actually note that Curtis was just quoting something you said, but I think
okay.
It's an interesting point. I think something I would ask, and I'd be interested in your opinion, is as you have all these other things, sort of come up, and you get drawn into meetings and contracts and so on. What would be your advice on balancing that with, you know, continuing your technical progression and skills?
Find someone to bounce things around with more than anything else. There's a few things there. One of them, again, this mental shift is really important. If you're going to be doing less hands-on time, that does mean you do have to expect more time in meetings. But the thing to ask yourself is, do you need to be in every meeting? Do you need to be in every conversation? How do you, in your team, potentially delegate some of that to others in your team? Give them the opportunity to start growing themselves. Think about setting behavioral expectations and setting up systems so you don't have to, you know, avoid that trap of micromanagement. Because a lot of the time, if you're trying to manage someone else at a detailed level and you're sitting over the shoulder of another team member and constantly paying attention to all the code in the pull requests that you might want to look at, you don't have time for everything else because you're trying to do too much. You're not giving your team that opportunity to grow themselves. So you've got to give them space, give them a set of expectations so they can fill that gap themselves. And then beyond that, whoever you're reporting to, because generally when the first time you're doing this, you're not the boss of the company. There will be others above you that you're reporting to. Go and have the conversations with them and ask them how they're handling it. It is hard, no question. So I might jump through, again, some of my experience so you can learn from some of my mistakes. Because I am dumb at times. So the crew that I was with at Textile Industries, they actually started their own company and invited me back in. So I went and joined them in this startup. And again, continuing my thread of running the greatest languages on the greatest hardware, I was writing basic code on 3100s, which is awesome. And hitting VB, baby. Woo, VB. We're doing ERP systems, textiles, and I got thrown into running multi-million-dollar projects in the glamour parts of the world. So Indonesia, Taiwan, Thailand, India, and not in the cities because they don't build factories in the cities. They build them out in the sticks where land is cheap. So I got to spend a lot of time out in the bushlands of these various countries, dealing with different kinds of people and for me, different cultures. And I did screw up, no question at all. You know, there's times where I lost my temper. I actually remember one time, not to my credit, where I told a guy whose office I was in to get out of his own office, just to leave. And he did, because I was having a temper tantrum like a 3-year-old. Setting expectations to others in my team where I actually expected them to be better, but I didn't communicate that or support them. And I was inconsistent as well, depending on where my attention was spread. I stuffed it up plenty of times. But again, because there'd been enough influence, enough trust and enough respect, and there was still that belief in me, when I made those mistakes and I was being dumb, they'd come in, they'd support me, give me a slap in the chops, and then I'd do the important thing, which is not reject the feedback, but learn from it. And this, again, to be ready to lead tomorrow, learn today. Learn from your mistakes when you're starting to lead in a more of an official capacity. And similarly, if you are leading other leaders, the same thing. If they're making mistakes, don't beat them up too much. Give them a bit of a slap in private. Give them some correction, but support them. Give them a bit more time, a bit more support. Try and help them and ask the questions to get them to talk through their problems before they go and make that again the next time. It's one of those hard things to do. And again, it's a balancing of the time problem. I also, you know, got given the opportunity to build a retail solution. Look at that. Wow, what a UI design. The best. I was checking out on the web during the week. This thing is still there, floating around on the web. Don't know why, it's really old, but technically this was quite cool in the day, you know, back in FTP dial-up connections and all sorts of stuff. But for me, this was the opportunity to really do things like not using capitals in my sentences, setting the vision and making sure I communicated it with my team. And here's what we want to achieve in a product. Here's why we're doing it. Here's the gaps that we're getting. Here's the feedback from customers, and pushing that through. And that gave me time to continue to grow and build my influence, and also to start maturing as a person and rubbing off some of my sharp edges and my sparkling personality at the time. So again, for yourselves, this is that as you grow and you're moving into this, it's never I've arrived. It's how do I keep growing and keep improving? Right back to that initial value, continuous incremental growth. All leaders should exhibit it no matter what point of their career they're at. More questions at this point, Alex?
No, there is currently not any questions.
Excellent. I shall carry on. Hopefully you're all enjoying lunch. So that leads us to phase 3 of our 3-act play, which is our expanding leadership. So from here, again, we did that focus from being a dev to splitting our attention across technical and leadership skills. Well, now as we expand and we move into larger scope and you're dealing with more people, and maybe you're running multiple teams now, and your leadership's being recognized, and you've got more and more to cover off, there is another focus shift that occurs. And your focus now becomes, how do I focus on purely my leadership team that I've got within me, and how do I make sure that they're working well with their teams rather than I'm focusing on a single team? Now, it doesn't mean at times you don't have to then jump in and still do support or guidance at that lower level team level, if that makes sense. You know, there's times where your leaders and your team leaders fall over and you need to go in and support them and get into the details. But generally, you're focusing on building the capabilities of those in your direct reports, not those down from there. And you then have to ask yourself at this point, do I really want to do this? Do I want to become potentially a post-technical leader? And I love that phrase and I hate it at the same time. I don't think personally we should ever stop being technical. That idea of continuous improvement, paying attention to what's going on around us in the industry, we should be doing that. We might not be hands-on code in our day-to-day jobs, but if we're not paying attention, we start turning ourselves into the ivory tower people that we despised in our youth. And we don't want to, well, I don't want to do that. You might want to, but I don't want to. So, I run a side project. I still obviously get involved in meetups. I'm still quite happy to jump in and do pair programming with people. I try and make time in my one-on-ones to talk through tech stuff with people, geek out, post blog posts that I find that are interesting, continue to share knowledge so that I still have the respect of my team, that when they talk to me about technical problems, I actually understand what they're doing, versus talking to someone who you want to get some advice from around a technical issue and maybe a design approach or something, and just bounce things around, and they look at you and they go, well, back in 1992 when I was writing VB1 and we used to use Windows 3.1, it was the best, we should do that again. It doesn't help, right? The world's changed and the world will constantly keep changing. If we don't change with it, we become irrelevant. So we need to stay on top of that. Now, you might go, well, actually, I don't want to do that. I want to get out of the tech industry because it's moving too fast. That's great. Use your leadership skills and transfer it to another aspect of the business. There's no problem at all in that. Life is a choose your own adventure. If it's not working for you and you're not happy, change. Not a problem. Or if you've been promoted and you feel like you want to demote yourself because you have more fun and you enjoy it more, it's not a problem at all. So here at Willow, where I am, I joined as head of engineering, just to walk through things, and I'll probably cover it in another slide. But as the role grew and as we've continued to grow as an organization, I realized that I don't scale, strangely enough. So within the org, what we did, we brought in a CTO. Now, I could have gone, I want to be the CTO because it's got a C and a T and an O in it, and it's all that sort of stuff. But the CTO is dealing with the C-level execs, and I've been there before, I've done that. And I know that I don't enjoy it as much. I much more enjoy being in this VP of engineering role where I'm thinking about tech processes and I'm still staying where I'm hands-on. to an extent. I'm quite happy to jump in and help people. And yes, I'm running multiple teams, and I've got a team of X people, and I'm still looking and hiring and all those things. And the arrangement I have with the CTO is he does the stuff I don't want to do, and I do the stuff he doesn't want to do. And it works really well. And it's a valid approach. That joy check, if you're not enjoying it, don't do it, because you won't be good at it. And you won't get satisfaction. You'll go home at night and you'll be frustrated. And it's not worth it.
Hey, Richard, question. Vic asks, how much does being likable help with, 1, getting the opportunity to lead, and 2, being a good leader?
Being likable? Well, that's part of influence. If you're not likable, it's really hard to influence people. Now, that doesn't mean be a suck up or be insincere. It doesn't mean be the life of the party. It doesn't mean be an extrovert. It doesn't mean any of that. What it means is don't be a dick. Just don't be a horrible person. Don't be someone who's ripping other people down. Be a positive influence. That makes a huge difference. Does that make you likable? Generally, yeah. Does it make you someone will, people will look up to and respect, which is a part of it? Generally, yeah. And that then becomes part of leadership. So you will find, and there are counter examples always, right? So you hear people talking about Bezos as being an unlikable person. And he's obviously successful. Zuckerberg, same deal. Are they great leaders? I don't know. Never worked for them. I don't plan on working for them because I don't think it's a culture I'd enjoy working in. Those organizations tend to work well because people go, hey, they're making money here, and I can go here and I can make a name for myself, and I can make a bit of cash because they're paying a lot. And then I'll churn my way out. I don't know. Again, maybe not the best answer in the world for you, but it's something to think about. Maybe another topic, right? There you go, new idea for next leadership session. As you are coming back to the content here, expanding leadership, find and nurture those leaders. I've talked about that to some extent, and this comes again to that idea of I don't scale, neither do you. You need to figure out ways to continue to grow your influence, and that is by building the team underneath you. You always want to be looking for the person who's going to take over your job, because at some point you will move up and move forward. So invest your time, energy into them, give them support, help them grow. Hopefully that's come through. I went quick, I went a slide too early, that's okay. And then remember to stay visible. Again, that idea that as you move up, the ivory tower problem comes in. If you're not seen, you're not leading. You need to stay visible. Even if you're running a 50,000 person company, you need to stay visible. The how you stay visible might change. You might have to do a whole lot more of video sharing, weekly updates, things like that. The mechanism changes, but you still want to be visible. People look for their leader to speak, to give them that idea of here's where we're going, here's what we're trying to achieve. Which means that as you expand, more people are demanding your time, which means balancing those demands gets harder and harder. I looked at my calendar this week and I had 2 half-hour free slots. Fantastic. It's the best, right? Calendar Tetris. And this has been a common pattern for the last however long, but a bunch of those slots are booked out for spending time with my teams. I've pre-booked them, they're already there, they're recurring invites, so I know I've got that time set aside, and that time's sacrosanct. It doesn't get swapped for anything else just because there's a customer meeting that needs to happen or there's a urgent request. It's always no, I'm already booked, sorry, get in early. And yes, meetings, block out the calendar, as I just said. So what if you don't enjoy that anymore? As I said, change. Or what if you're beyond your natural level of influence? People have this level of influence. There's a point where you hit a ceiling. How do you grow that further? Well, that then comes back to find someone who's ahead of you in terms of leadership and start spending more time with them. Get them to be your mentor, get them to give you feedback, get them to give you the day-to-day tips in the situation you're in, so that you can work through that exactly the same as you did with those leaders under you, and exactly the same as you did hopefully when you first started leading and you've got junior devs, for example. And then beyond that, keep learning, keep growing, because if you don't do that, you start ossifying, and that's a bad thing. All right, so where am I currently? Where have I been? So I did this at a company called MXL Student Admins. I was a CTO and CIO there. It was a split role, which was fun. So I was looking after ops teams and devs teams and everything else. One of the fun parts there was that I lost most of my team in the first 6 months. I was effectively the smiling assassin at that point in time. As CEO called me that directly. It was always fun. But that was basically because we had a culture problem. We had to change the culture. And does that mean breaking a few eggs? Yeah, sometimes it does, unfortunately. So how did I do that? I just set the expectations, communicated the vision. They decided that wasn't for them. I said, no problem, off you go. I had one guy turn up and go, well, I'm leaving unless you give me a 20 grand pay rise because it was promised to me by the previous person. Cool, you just told me you're a mercenary and you're not here to be part of the team. Go find your 20 grand elsewhere, bye. And that might sound harsh and callous, but these are some of those decisions you've got to make in terms of what culture do you want in your teams? How do you find people who you can collaborate with, who you can grow with, who you can, who you can build up to be leaders themselves? And, I had a CEO there, ex-Mac Bank, and I used him a lot for a whole lot of these ideas, sounding boards. He was my mentor around a lot of this stuff. And again, supported me when I made mistakes. Just because you're growing and your influence is expanding doesn't mean you don't screw up. I still do that where I am now. Definitely still do that now. I spent a lot of time as a principal consultant at Redify, which is now Purple. And my lesson there, the biggest one through my, what was going to be 12 months, but turned into 12 years career there, was consultants have zero authority. Zero. You only have influence. That's the only way you actually get anything to change. And so as a consultant, sure, you come in with a level of respect straight off because you've been brought in, but how you do things with that is really where it comes. So here I've been, as a consultant, I've hired and fired people, which is kind of weird. Seen people promoted, restructured companies, done a whole lot of stuff, as you can see, all through influence, all through having an ability to think outside of just the tech space. Think about business, think about culture, think about people and interactions, and everything else that I've used through my career to date all came to bear during that consulting period. And then that ability to then jump across all the different companies that I was working with then meant that I did a whole lot of other growth to see different things that I hadn't seen to date. And that helped me again to continue to grow the influence and continue to round out my capabilities and continue to grow. Which then of course led me to where I am today, which is here at Willow. And even joining here, there's problems. We came in and had teams that were unclear on how they worked. We had different silos. We had a whole lot of growth coming at us and we weren't ready for it. Identifying leaders in the company, understanding that we could do, putting in things like a work from anywhere culture before it got forced on us through COVID. So, I might be in the office at the moment, but I'm only here 1 day a week. I do 4 days at home. I've got tech leads and people in the teams that are in the US and people in Europe and people in South Africa and Israel and Philippines, and we're all over the shop. We have a genuinely distributed team. So how do we make sure that we communicate well in a time zone distributed team, not just a geographically distributed team? It comes down to a lot of asynchronous communications and making sure that I can communicate well in text and video and sharing information that way. And yet again, I still make mistakes. So recently I've got some feedback, as you can see down the bottom. Excellent, providing technical direction and vision, but the teams don't know me because I'd ended up stuck with one team where I had a whole lot of people I was investing time into. I missed my balance and didn't get it right with the rest of the teams who I was kind of leaving to their own devices. Good thing is, you learn, you adjust, you make the changes, and then pick that up and improve, and it's all good now. But that was a mistake. And it also took me a little while to find someone who was willing to tell me I was an idiot. And that still happens. Yes, I know it still happens. I can be an idiot. And I can say things that are stupid, and I can say things that didn't come out the right way, and they will give me that feedback. And we need that. We need those people to do that, because that's, again, that idea of how do I figure out and adjust my communication and so forth. So that's a run through, kind of multiple stages of the career. Questions for you first. And you should ask yourself these things. Do you actually enjoy leadership? If you don't, that's great. Don't do it. Do your people that you're looking to grow, do they actually want to be leaders? Again, if they don't, that's great. Encourage them to be the best technical people they can be. There's a need for that in every team. What are you doing to learn and be prepared so that when opportunity knocks, you're ready? What are you doing to grow those around you? How are you influencing people? Or have you substituted management itself for leadership and thought that just management is fine? So that's where we're at. That's our lunch. Hopefully you've all eaten now and you've had a drink and are ready to hit me up with a few more questions. So in the remaining time, open Q&A. Ready for you.
Thanks, Richard, for that. Now, there's one question in the chat at the moment, and that's from Prab. And Prab asks, as VP, how do you validate your existence in the organization amidst maybe directors, senior managers, etc.? Did you want to say a bit more maybe in the chat, Prab? Were you looking for Richard's specific experience around that?
I'm kind of curious, like, yeah, what a little bit what the question is. I might just stop sharing.
And please, if other folks have questions, please feel free to add them.
Absolutely. So just run the question again by me. I'm trying to understand it.
So Prab said, as VP, how do you validate your existence in the organization amidst maybe directors, senior managers, etc.? And Prab says, these are times where it's more a flat hierarchy.
Okay. So probably, again, the day-to-day role for me is helping teams be successful. That's at the end of the day, that's my job. How do I help my teams be successful? How do I help them identify and eliminate waste in what we do? How do I give them the tooling, the practices, the culture, so that they will win effectively? How do I justify that to the organization? Increase productivity, better collaboration, lower staff turnover, all of those sort of things are effectively the evidence that that's working. And then on top of that, the Willow becomes a place people want to work. So we've started being recognized. I think we got recognized by LinkedIn as one of the top 10 startups to work for this year, which is a nice thing. I'd like to take all the credit myself, but that's not the case. But it's that piece, right? So anyone who's in senior leadership will understand the value of an environment where people are able to come in, work well, and be successful. And if you're doing that well, then there's no justification needed, because it's obvious. And
Mish asks, as a leader, what do you want to get out of your one-on-ones with your reports?
Yeah, good question. Fairly simple. It's listening for any trouble that's happening in the team that might not have bubbled up to me, but it's not tactical. So I don't tend to talk too much about the day-to-day. I don't ask them what they're doing. I don't ask them too much about what problems they're currently facing, unless they volunteer. But my goal with all of these things is to give them an opportunity to talk to me. So what is it that's going on in your day-to-day? What is it you're interested in? What are the pain points you're feeling? What do we need to think about in terms of career growth for you? What are the opportunities I'm not giving you? How can I help? So it's not about me transmitting to them. It's about giving them an opportunity to talk to me and know that they're talking to someone who can make a difference.
Tim asks, how much effort do you expend on visibility up vs visibility down, 50-50 or something else?
I've never thought about it as a effort up and effort down. I probably spend far less effort up because there's fewer people up than there are down. So when there's a larger team, I spend much more time thinking about how do I make sure those people are seeing and the vision and understanding what's going on. And the conversations back the other way is probably at most 5 to 10 hours a week at most, depending on the week. A lot of that is ad hoc conversations, a chat here, a chat there. But much more time is spent with the teams and making sure they're good.
That's all the questions we've got in the stream.
Great.
So thank you very much for your time. Before we wrap that up, I think you wanted to maybe plug some opportunities you might have had at Willow.
Yes, I'm looking for people. I'm hiring. We're still growing. We hire from anywhere. I don't care where you are. We are a .NET shop. I'm looking for tech leads. I'm looking for great devs. I'm looking for mobile. I'm looking for QA. I'm looking for everything pretty much. Pick a role and I've probably got one. We're a company that's growing. Look us up, willowinc.com. Don't go to Willow itself because you'll find like Eskies and stuff. And be careful if you go to the Willow in the US because you'll find IoT breast pumps. So Willow Inc., digital twins. Yeah, very cool. Thanks, Alex.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time, Richard. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their Friday and has a good weekend.
Bye all.
Thanks,
Been great chatting. Enjoy your afternoons. Work well. Enjoy Christmas.